Welcome to Dev Interrupted. I'm your host, Andrew Ziegler. And joining me for this week's news is past Dev Interrupted guest and my friend at so many conferences on the ground, Andrew Boyagi, customer CTO at Atlassian. And congratulations, by the way, Andrew, on your recent promotion. It's really well deserved. And I appreciate you taking time out of that to fill in for Ben this week.
Thanks, Andrew. Really good to be talking to you.
Amazing. Well, I know you've had a lot of exciting stuff going on in your world, and we're going to touch on that a little bit today in our news segment. But for those listening, as you know, we kick off every episode by going through the weekly news in the tech world, which gets weirder and weirder every week that we talk about it. It seems so. We picked out some fun stories for y'all. This week, we're covering the recent Claude Code usage cap and what it really tells us about developer and user consumption of these tools. We also get a glimpse at OpenAI's new study mode, which could be a really interesting new utility for those using ChatGPT to learn, as well as a new wave of age verification requirements hitting the web. And personally, how I see a lot of parallels to that and things happening in our own engineering stacks. And last but not least, we're going to touch again on the recent developer survey from Atlassian. I know we've mentioned it here on Dev Interrupted, but we have Andrew here in the flesh or in the voice with us today, and he's actually one of the voices behind this survey. So we're going to get in a little deeper and learn some more. But Andrew, I'm going to make you work for it. Let's start on the opposite end of the track and work our way towards Atlassian. I'd love to get your thoughts on some of the things that we're seeing because it's been an interesting week. So I'm going to start us off with Anthropic. Does that sound good with you?
Sounds good.
Okay, perfect. So, you may have heard in the last week that Anthropic is capping the usage of Claude Code. And to anyone else tracking like metered usage and subscription services of these tools, this is just another pricing change dropping in the bucket. We've been seeing all of these providers and tools experiment with new pricing models, put things behind very high paywalls. But this one's a little different because, as part of this revelation, many took to the internet to express their frustration with those who were perhaps using Claude Code in extreme ways, querying hundreds or thousands of agents to do all sorts of things, and perhaps ruining the fun for everyone else. But it's not really quite ruining the fun as experimenting because my friend Joffrey Huntley of SourceGraph's AMP and a thought leader in the agentic coding space whose work we've shared on the podcast, he's one of these power users, in fact, that got ranked on Reddit in the past week. And you got to see it to believe it. So we're going to include the link to this post in the in the comment or in the newsletter. But he tops the chart on the Claude Code consumption leaderboards with a purported $450,000 in inference, and that's spent on Anthropic's dime, way beyond his subscription cost, of course. And you might be wondering, like many, scratching your head on Reddit, what is Joffrey even building? And well, it's a programming language, in fact. And if you haven't checked it out, it's pretty cool. It's C compatible. It's called Curses. It uses Gen Z slang and logo for all of the namespaces. And he live streams 4 agents building it in loop while he's totally AFK. So this is a really interesting usage of coding tools and an expensive glimpse at the future, maybe. So, Andrew, what do you think of this wild usage of coding tools, and what do you think it means for how developers are experimenting?
Yeah, I mean, like that's probably not a standard use case of using Claude. So I wouldn't be expecting the average person to be spending $500,000 on building something with Claude. But you're right. I mean, like we're in an experimental phase. Like if you think about where we are in AI and its adoption with developers, we're probably still at the beginning. It's only been a few years. So I'd expect pricing changes and different models and different ways. Obviously, a lot of companies are still adjusting to usage patterns and they're learning as much as the users are learning on how to use it. So, uh, you know, hopefully it's not going to become this really expensive thing that puts it out of reach for most people. But I'd expect, it shouldn't be unexpected that we're seeing these pricing changes and different ways of consuming AI.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot too, like with a lot of tools, maybe that were traditionally more seat-based models, switching to like a subscription-based, consumption-based models better reflects the usage costs and what's actually going on underneath those products that they're buying, which have so much, inference inside of them now. It's really interesting to see the shift. And I agree, most folks are not going to casually be building a $500,000 vibe coding project while AFK in some split terminal windows. But the fact that it happens means that, these providers have to take action. But they did say, a cherry on top for those that might be frustrated by this news, that these changes are only going to affect less than 5% of their users. So if you're using these tools, you're probably still in the green to keep spamming away with whatever prompts you're already doing. So moving on to our next news item, this is another modality of operating with AI, and it's something that we've touched on before on Dev Interrupted, and that's using AI to learn. You know, recently I was at the Atlassian conference, Atlassian team, and when I was there, I listened to Ben Gomez, the SVP of learning at Google, and I know Andrew was there too, and we listened to him talk about how folks are using AI to learn and engaging with it and asking questions Socratically. What does this mean? Can you explain this to me? Or otherwise, assuming you know nothing and having you and the LLM work together to build understandings. This is a pedagogy model of interacting with AI to learn, and it's something that's transforming learning. So ChatGPT is unveiling a new study mode to allow folks to ask questions, interact with it, and it doesn't just give them the answer. It asks them critical questions to help flex those muscles and those critical thinking skills that you're starting to, atrophy as folks are talking about. And there are some really cool standout quotes from this article. I'm going to drop them in. But one of them comes from Robbie Torney, the senior director of AI programs at Common Sense Media. She really highlights how instead of doing the work for them, study modes encourages students to think critically about their learning, and it's a positive step towards the effective use of learning in AI. And if you've been listening to this podcast, at me, someone who used to be a classroom teacher, this speaks very closely to me. I think all the time about how my students would be using AI right now if I were their teacher. So this is a really interesting change that might encourage more tools and more educational offerings around AI to help every student have access to their own private tutor. Because how great would that be? Andrew, what do you think of this kind of Socratic work with AI?
Like it's a super interesting topic, right? Because I think it depends how you use AI. I think it's a great thing that OpenAI are releasing. But if I think about my own usage, a lot of the time I'm asking AI questions and I use it to learn in that way as well. Like, what is this? How does it work? Tell me what else I need to know, etc. But if I ask it for the answer, I'm not learning anymore. And so it's this really interesting thing where, yes, in some cases, you may be regressing in your knowledge because you're not using those skills anymore. Like I recently completed my MBA a few years ago, and during that time, I had to learn some skills about research, around writing and academic writing. If I used AI for that today, I wouldn't have built those skills because AI would have just done it for me. So I think it's a great thing that there's a way that OpenAI are looking at helping people use ChatGPT to learn rather than just give answers.
Yeah, it definitely addresses a learning crisis that I think a lot of educators and even learners themselves are experiencing. It's incredibly, even if you want to be that good learner and, really ask the questions and do the hard work, it's hard when you exist in a competitive academic environment where you're incentivized to use the best tools and things available to go as fast as possible, even if that means you're not as critically thinking about it, right? And so those are real dangers of how we're incentivized to learn. This is an interesting adaptation towards that. And I agree. It's like you ultimately still want to it comes from a curiosity. If you never lose your curiosity, then you're gonna always be able to ask those questions. So if you're listening, don't stop being curious.
But it's even in a work sense, right? Like sometimes for me, like I've been learning in every single role that I've had in my career, but you're under time pressure, so it's really easy to take
Mhm.
a look at just to ask for the answer rather than to understand why that answer is the right one. So yeah, super interesting topic.
Yeah, very much so. And so if you all are thinking about this, we'd love to hear what you think in the comments as well, because we're going to be covering these stories more. Education and learning around AI space is a really interesting topic for me. So, and another one I want to touch on just for a brief moment, if only just because I see a really interesting parallel. And this is an age verification thing rolling out across the internet. Because on July 25th recently, UK became one of the first countries to widely implement this type of age verification for many services and websites that required them to servably prove that their users were adults in whatever situation. And we're talking about you like almost everyday apps, right? And so many products and services have responded by simply pulling out of the environment until they can make their own changes. As we know, rolling out an age verification overnight on a platform sounds really daunting. So I imagine that these companies want more runway. But actually, what I see is so many things about users tricking the verification tools or bypassing them with VPNs and otherwise getting around these roadblocks that get thrown up. And I think it's just a taste of the issues that we see all the time in IT, in engineering. You get this experience called shadow IT, where if you throw up that roadblock or you make it a little harder to do that thing, or if you want to like have absolute control and knowledge over everything that walks in and out of that door, you know, the people who want to move fast and break things and are actually in your IDEs writing the code and shipping it, they don't want to be slowed down by that. They don't want to have to go through that scanner every time they're walking into the building. So that's where you end up with shortcuts and holes in the wall and people with their own servers hosted places. And it almost encourages that behavior. So when I was reading this and folks were calling out in these really interesting anecdotes in this article by Emma Roth about how they were bypassing it, all I could think, story after story, was this is just like somebody downloading whatever and then running it on the IT server. And Andrew, what do you think about these kinds of roadblocks?
Having led a platform team for many years, I can empathize heavily with what you're saying. And it is very similar. Like you said, I mean, you've got users on one side trying to do something. You've got maybe the government in this case, or senior leaders in normal companies who have slightly different objective. And it's a balance at the end of the day. Like people often skew towards one or the other. And the same as in, when you're running a platform team, there are two sides to it and you got to try and find a nice balance.
Absolutely. And you know that we say all the time on Dev Interrupted and even at Linear B where I work that, the VP of engineering is the hardest job at the company. It's harder than CEO, it's harder than anything else because you're beholden to your non-technical stakeholders, but then you have to, create the right environment for your technical ones. And nothing pulls you in two opposite directions, sometimes more than that. So those were some of our news stories, and the last one, now that we're into our track, Andrew is talking about the Atlassian research, the really interesting stuff that y'all have uncovered about AI adoption rising, but friction still persisting. So for folks that have not read this report, be sure to check out the link in our newsletter to go and take a further read. But Andrew, why don't you maybe set the scene for us about what was the question y'all set out to learn, and what did you learn?
Yeah, it's a second year in a row that we've run our developer experience survey. And really what we're trying to understand is just the state of developer experience across the world. It's a global survey. This year in particular, we wanted to understand how AI is changing developer experience. And maybe I'll just highlight a few interesting things that stuck out to me from the data that we collected.
Mm.
One was, so we know that all developers are using AI, or a high percentage of them. And there's already a lot of data in the industry from many different surveys around how much time are developers saving or not saving using coding agents. And so we took a different tack. We wanted to understand how are they using AI across their entire work week and how much time is it saving them. And in that way, you're kind of thinking about them as knowledge workers rather than just the development part of their role. And as you expect, they're reporting a large saving of time using AI across their entire working week, which sounds great. Everyone wants to save time. The downside of that is they're losing more time now than they were last year to organizational inefficiencies and friction. And so really what that highlights to me is we're investing heavily across the industry in developer experience in maybe solving a problem that's not really a problem for developers, because over the last 18 months, as you know, most companies have invested heavily in coding assistance. That has never been a top friction point for developers. So it's not really solving a problem for them. It can enhance developer experience, but there are other problems which look like they're getting worse for developers, that are not being addressed. So any time saving they're gaining from using AI is being lost in other areas where friction has not been addressed.
What you just touched on is really interesting and something that we've been talking about a bit here at Dev Interrupted, as well about, when ultimately you go faster in one spot, and in this case, we're talking about creating lots of code. We have a proliferation of code. Everyone's drowning in more code than they wanted. But if you back up for a moment, no one was ever saying that more code was the answer. Less code was never the problem. The problem is the shape of the process that the code moves through. And so if you add more code, then it's going to exacerbate those problems, right? So, we even had that webinar recently where we had Susie Price, our a Prince at Atlassian join us, as well as several other folks, someone from ThoughtWorks. We all talked about this particular problem about how when you generate lots of code, it creates a huge bottleneck in one spot, and ultimately, uh, the time you spend solving that problem is the time that you gained, and maybe some more time too from having, automated it in the first place. I think it really highlights the importance for knowledge workers, that have specific habits with how they, ingest their own information, what are their inputs, how they take care of it, and then how they use their outputs, right? It's like, as a knowledge worker, the best thing you can do is always have your outputs be making your inputs better. You want to refract your work back on itself, right? So, it really highlights that if these gains highlight organizational problems, then the root of your ability to work quickly is organizational. It really shines a light on what you have to resolve, right? But when y'all looked at the survey and you looked at knowledge workers, so you're taking a much wider swath of kind of like users. So you're not even looking at generating code, you're just looking at time saved and how efficient they felt from there. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, so the survey was for developers,
Mm,
but the reason why we didn't focus on coding is because that is such a small part of any engineer's role. So
mm.
me, it's not actually valuable to even understand that, because what you want, the goal is to deliver higher quality software faster. And coding is a very small part of that. It's actually the fastest part, and it's the part that
Yep.
people like doing. So why optimize? I did a LinkedIn post the other day and I said, that's like polishing the chrome wheels on a broken down car. Yeah. Fix
Yeah,
the
it's the
rest of the
wrong
car.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, completely. I resonate with that a lot, and I think that there was also another interesting learning in here about, the gap in that misunderstanding getting wider. I just talked about how, like, more code was never the problem, and you're calling out, like, the same thing as well. It seems like there might even be a growing disconnect between leaders who, use and mandate those tools versus, like, the developers who utilize them. So, in this survey, I think when y'all noticed that too, growing, differences between how they think about it and their leadership did.
Yeah. I mean, 63% of the developers we surveyed said their leaders do not understand their pain points, which is a huge problem, right? Because improving developer experience is essentially the process of resolving friction points for developers. So when you resolve those friction points, their experience gets better, they're more productive, they're happier. How can you do that if you do not understand the problems that they're facing? It means you end up either solving the wrong problem, for
Mhm.
example, getting people to code faster, or you fix the right problems in the wrong way, which is even worse because that's even more frustrating for developers.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it proves the point in the wrong in the from the wrong direction in the wrong way. It erodes that trust even further, right? And I think that's a really interesting call out. I've noticed this trend before. I know our listeners have too. This growing gap. I know I've been following a lot of articles and sharing them here too from Lead Dev. There was their recent developer survey from Scott Carey that found a lot of these same growing disconnects. So, you know, I think it really highlights the importance of building those communication muscles within your org, and making sure that you are doing check-ins on how teams and leaders are actually thinking about this stuff. But for folks who found this interesting, there's so much more to learn in the stuff that we covered today. So all of these news articles, like always, are going to be in our wrap up on our Substack. So you can definitely go check out this Atlassian research. I highly encourage you to. And Andrew, thank you so much again for taking time out of your schedule to join us. What's next for you in your big adventure?
As you know, for the last few years, I've been global head of DevOps evangelism at Atlassian. I've just taken a new role at Atlassian as customer CTO for Atlassian Williams Racing. So I'm in the process of relocating to the UK, and
Wow.
I'll be the directly responsible individual from Atlassian to help drive transformation for a Formula One team, which is really exciting.
That is really cool, and if you're listening and you're wondering, "What? Atlassian, Formula One, what's up with that?" You have to be paying attention to this Atlassian and Williams Racing have been working together, to collaborate and build the greatest race car team of all time, and I've been following the story so closely. I'll include a link so y'all can do so as well, and, Andrew, we're gonna keep following your story. I really appreciate, again, you coming on here with us, and for those of you, listening, stick around for our upcoming conversation because after the break, I'm sitting down with then CTO of Apollo GraphQL, Matt DeBergalis. And since recording that conversation, Matt has since stepped into the shoes of Apollo's CEO, which is really exciting. So many job promotions on today's episode. So massive congrats to Matt and to Andrew. And we're really excited for you to take the reins of a great company. So stick around, y'all. We're going to be diving in with Matt pre CEO. So stick around. Hey, everyone who's been listening. Today, we're joined by someone who has helped define how modern software gets built in many different ways. His name is Matt DeBergalis, the co founder and CTO of Apollo GraphQL and the co creator of Meteor.js. And if you've been listening to the pod lately, you know we've been talking about how AI is colliding with traditional APIs and the teams that build and manage them. And the rise of agents means a lot of different things for software development. But this shift isn't just a tooling upgrade, it's a rewiring of the entire developer experience. And today we're going deep on what those things like agent experience really mean and how graph is at the center of it all. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Great. Well, let's go ahead and dive in because we have some cool stuff to talk about today. We've been talking a bit about this new term, agent experience. It's kind of like a complementary to
Yeah.
developer experience. And it seems like it may be an evolution. Some people see it as a replacement. There's lots of people who have different opinions on this. But Matt, what do you think about this emerging concept of agent experience? Is it really any different?
It's such an exciting time. And, I've been building software for a few decades now, and I've never seen anything like this in terms of just how quickly things are changing. So I suspect we have a lot more to learn.
Mm,
But the the cool thing about bringing AI into the development experience is just what it lets us rethink, I think, across different parts of the stack. And, I do this because I want to see lots of great software in the world. I think we need more of it. I think we need it coming from people with more backgrounds and different perspectives. And so for those of us in the dev tool space who think about infrastructure and the plumbing that makes all this stuff go under the hood, the rise of AI is like this new superpower that we can use in different ways. And we could talk about what this means for creating APIs or calling APIs or lots of different parts of the stack. But I think it's going to change a lot, right? I think AIs don't work the way that people work, and some of the things that were maybe secondary concerns when we were building infrastructure for people to use are going to come to the fore.
mm.
Um, some of the things that maybe felt really important to get right turn out to be less critical. And I just try to come in with an open mind because I don't think anybody has the answer. And I think only exploring this stuff is going to get us there.
Yeah. I completely agree about there's a lot of software to be built now, and there's a lot of scrambling to figure out how we build it. I think it's a really insightful call out that you say that some things move more to the forefront in terms of what we need to be concerned about. Some things maybe take more of a backseat because now they're simpler or easier to approach. So it's really like a reshuffling maybe of the
Yeah.
priorities and what's
That
important.
that's just my fancy caveat for whatever I say next may not be true,
Right.
but I we've certainly learned a lot about what does have to change. And I just think it's important to remember we're on day one of a big transformation and how all this works.
And this transformation, do you think it starts at any particular point of the developer experience or API orchestration? Like, is there like an obvious starting spot or is it kind of attacking it from all sides?
Well, I mean, there was a chapter of AI right away where the LLMs were clearly helpful assistants for the engineers and really everybody in software development. And obviously they've gotten better, but even in the early days, I think we all had these experiences that made us rethink, hey, I've got the ultimate pair programmer sitting next to me, or, I'm a tech lead now. I'm not just gonna write the software myself. There's another chapter that's just emerged. Anthropic announces MCP a few
Mm.
months back, and it's to us, it's sort of the starting gun for now we can build agents, right? Now there's an accepted way that the AIs can actually talk to external systems. So that leads to a whole other category of stuff that we can think about doing. I think that one's a lot more nascent, but it's near and dear to my heart because Apollo is, at the end of the day, we're an API company. We're about infrastructure that lets you connect your software to your APIs, and an agent that can call APIs is an agent that's actually useful. It can do stuff, right? If you think about all the interesting actions you might want to take, if you want to put something in your shopping cart or get a
Mm.
shipping price estimate or recommend a product for another user, these are all at the end of the day going to be API calls. It's just a lot more interesting than the early chapter of user facing AI that was about, training the model or maybe a database that could augment the context with RAG. I don't think we've really all kind of come to terms with how quickly this may go and how deep that rabbit hole is. If you just think about all the interactions that people have with businesses and software and how much of that might now be in reach for a good AI that's connected to the rest of the business, that's going to be interesting. And we're trying to ask, like, what can we do to help that, help shape that, help make um, not just get there faster, but more safely, in a way that's like built for the long haul. And there's a lot of exciting opportunity there.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity for people to experiment, but like you said, to also figure out what's the paradigm that's going to survive, what's the pattern of implementation that's going to really prevail here. And
Yeah.
as people experiment and we're building agents, we're giving agents tools, it sounds like we're entering a world where API consumption is going to go up, maybe go up a lot.
A
Do you
lot.
feel that way?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. And so we're the GraphQL company. Just to
Right.
set the stage here, we are excited about GraphQL because it's a query language for your APIs. What it means is in a world of microservices and cloud systems and SaaS, maybe 10, 20 years ago, you only had a handful of APIs that you built your software on, but now you've got a typical app maybe sits on 50 or 100 different APIs. And you need infrastructure, you need machinery to help orchestrate how all those API calls get made. The idea that you're going to handwrite code doesn't really scale when you start talking about systems of this size.
Right.
And so we've been working for years now on what's the landscape of how to drive more value from APIs that people have. One of the things a lot of GraphQL users um, first come to GraphQL for is they've got an API that was built for one use case, but now there's this desire to ship a different kind of user experience. Maybe you're building a mobile application that drove a lot of the early excitement around GraphQL, or a lot of in our customers, there's this push toward meeting the end user more where they are. Like if you think about a modern hotel experience, there's probably a kiosk in the lobby where you can check in. That's just another set of API calls. It's a different kind of software. Maybe
Right.
you can unlock your room from your phone. Maybe when you go in your room, your name's on the TV and there's a welcome message. And maybe you can um, ask for a late checkout during your reservation flow online. Uh, and that's an example. All of those are systems that are being repurposed and kind of recombined or composed into this new kind of experience. I think AI is just going to be like the mother of that, right? Because it's so
Mm.
flexible. And if you imagine what it's going to be like in a year or two, talking to an AI or using an AI first application, yeah, it's going to make a lot more API calls. It's going to do it in new ways with new combinations. Um, And I think the handwritten software is always kind of limited. You can only ship so many versions of your app every year. We
Right.
don't have that limit anymore. So we may also find that the pace of all this stuff just hits a new level that we're going to have to get used to, and that has implications too for how quickly this stuff gets added.
Yeah. And definitely a compounding speed factor. It seems to go faster and faster the more sophisticated it gets. And your position and what you've been doing at GraphQL and working on Graph is it puts you actually in this really unique spot of expertise because you already know that like just you can't just throw an API on top of everything. You need to have a structured, orchestrated way of accessing your data that is flexible for all the different experiences you want to provide. And then now that's evolving, like you said, into an MCP type experience. And you see some companies that see this and just try to map like one-to-one API to MCP. People talk about how that doesn't necessarily work. And it reminds me a lot of how what
Yeah.
GraphQL does on top of an API, because it allows you to ask for specifically what you want. It's a structured query language, and it's semantic. And that semanticism is what is so important to it. And I think that has a lot of parallels with MCP. Do you feel the same, or do you think that it's kind of evolving in a different way?
Yeah, that's a good example of where um, agent experience is going to be a little different from the human experience or the developer experience. It's really clear from work we've done and what we've done together with customers that the semantic precision of GraphQL is a great fit for the models. The models are really good about reasoning, and GraphQL, if you haven't used it, it's strongly typed.
Right.
It's self-documenting, so you can put English language doc strings, and that's been a best practice in the GraphQL world for a long time. There's even more than that. There's a place to put comments, and we've found sort of along the lines of, an LLMs.txt file, you can talk to the model in the definition of the graph in a pretty mm, helpful way, it turns out, to help the model navigate. And at the end of the day, the graph is a set of objects that mean something. The big insight of GraphQL is instead of looking at your APIs as a set of separate endpoints that just return JSON, you can look at all those APIs together as a network of objects.
Right.
And the properties of each object, maybe that's a product object or a review object or a shopping cart object, if you think about an e-commerce example, the properties of those objects are provided by different APIs and they're scattered all over the place. That's just the nature of what happens when you build software. Bringing that all back home and giving the model a precise construction of the meaning of all this stuff has profound impact um, on what it can do and what can it understand.
And so that structured and queryable intent behind the data it seeks, that unlocks better outcomes for AI systems as people experiment. Because just like what you mentioned
Yeah,
about, you go to a hotel and you have all of these different unique experiences that are all probably their own, APIs somewhere managed by some team, but they all are very different from each other. But they work together to create a
yeah,
cohesive experience of I'm at the hotel. This is convenient. I can get what I want, right? And it sounds like what you're hinting at is that the layer that we're building now with agents, it has that same amount of personalization and customization, right? It's like you really want to be able to take all of your systems, all of your APIs, all of your tools and products, and put it into one spot where the LLM can decide with its own reasoning and logic for what it wants, what to
yeah.
pick and choose and call. And then that again, going back to what you said, is why Graph is so powerful for this, because it's going to allow it to access exactly what it wants. And this is actually, it sounds like going to unlock scaling. Because going back to what we mentioned, like API consumption is going to go through the roof. We talked about this recently with a guest on the show, Sagar Bachu of Speakeasy. He talked about how API consumption is going to go up and up. And as I talk with more leaders, it seems to feel the same from them as well. And so if you're building tooling and you're trying to orchestrate this, what does that look like in the future that's different from
Yeah.
today?
I think this is a great example where engineering leaders need to rethink some of the conventional wisdom of the last generation because of AI. Like take microservices as an example. So there's been this era of development where we said, okay, the way you scale an organization, the way you organize your teams is you build individual services that can be called independently and composed together. And it goes back to like the Jeff Bezos, memo at Amazon, right?
Yep.
Everything's got to be an API and there's no other interface into your system. It's a great model. And part of what made that model work is that it created this really clear responsibility. Your job as a service owner is a very clear, tightly scoped responsibility. We could talk about SLAs, we could talk about performance, metrics, and somebody else, some human or some other team is going to make use of that alongside a bunch of other APIs to create a piece of software. AI changes that a bit because you can't just rely on the AI to do all that work that humans did. That's pretty high level architectural work, right? I mean, AI can write some code that'll call an API for you, but asking it to build a whole system that correctly and always the same way, combines 10, 20, 30, 50 API calls and handles all of the stuff around like errors and retry and all the subtlety that goes with that. That's a
Right.
bit much. So if you're an API owner, if you're a team leader for an API, I think one of the things AI is going to do is it's going to force you to think more broadly about how is this all going to fit together, and what do I need to do with my API to make this part of a working system when a lot of the software is being built with the assistance of AI. And I think that's going to force people to take more of a platform view of the world because we're going to need infrastructure at all different levels of the stack. AI is very, very good when you pair it with a semantic, declarative piece of infrastructure. Lots of people are using AI to help write React components, for example. There's another declarative architecture. But I don't think anybody's seriously talking about dumping React and just asking an LLM to automatically fit all the components together, right? That's the job of the infrastructure. The pressure to combine stuff in new ways and the fact that the AI is pretty good at parts of that and pretty turned around with other parts of that, I think forces a lot of us that are tech leaders to really zoom out and view the whole picture.
Yeah. So the nature of LLMs being probabilistic, right? Going back to what you just said about, you can't necessarily rely on them to make all of the calls correctly in the right way, handle all the errors and kind of
Yeah.
combine everything, because there can be lots of deviations. And when you're in the world of APIs, like you don't want to deviate from what the API is giving you. And so,
And
yeah,
and even how they combine. Like we shipped an MCP server today for Apollo. This allows you to use AI to talk to your graph. And I wrote a blog post and I talk about this. Imagine a bank. You don't want one of your customers, if you're asking the AI agent for your recent transactions, you don't want one of your customers to get back 5 and the next one to get back 8.
right.
And you don't want, sometimes it includes like the remaining balance along with the transaction, and sometimes it doesn't. You know what I mean? Like it's more than just how to combine the APIs. It's all these decisions that we used to make in the code about exactly what we want, how we want it presented, exactly what combinations, who's allowed to see what. That is so important, because at the end of the day, this all comes back to like we're making software for people, and we want people to have a great experience, and it's really important to hit that note. I don't think there's a single Apollo user that I've talked to that isn't building an agent, isn't thinking about what these experiences are going to be like. But the flip side of it is all that stuff is still on the way to production. We're really early in actually rolling this stuff out. And the reason is because getting this stuff right is part of what has to happen if you're
Right.
if you're serious about, putting that kind of software in front of people.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to ship these kinds of experiences that are so sophisticated with an LLM, you need to have insight into how they work. You need to be able to reliably understand their outcomes, and it goes back to like LLMs. They're pairing well with strong semantic like infrastructure and orchestration, things that help keep them on the rails. Like the LLM can be the creative kind of composer of all of
Yeah.
these different tools and pieces, but it needs to be guided by a rigid system that tells it yes, no, and keeps it in line. And so it sounds like that pairs really, really nicely with, semantic data that you get from a graph. It feels like a natural ingredient within that mix. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a left brain, right brain thing, and
Yeah.
they work very well together.
Yeah. And so as these things get more sophisticated and we have more ability to get nuanced information, make nuanced requests in a chat or otherwise using a tool with natural language, um, it kind of starts to open up a world where you get a you can kind of solve everything with a conversation. Do you think that we might evolve into a place where most applications and ways of going about doing things on a computer reside within a kind of like a chat type of interface? Or do you think that chat is limiting and that there's maybe an additional way that this is all going to be evolving?
I think we're gonna find out. It's when mobile came out, I mean, in some sense, a mobile app is just a computer app on a smaller screen, right? But it turns out multi-touch was important, and some of the user interface things that work really well on a desktop don't work at all on mobile, and vice versa, right? I think mobile gave rise to a world of map-based experiences, for example. It's not like we didn't have maps on the desktop, but it's very different when it's
Right.
in your hand. I think that's
Right.
gonna play out with AI. Like, we know some of the answers. We know there's gonna be this natural language back and forth. I suspect a lot of that's gonna be spoken. Um, but we also know, these generative systems are really good at building graphics. So I think we might find some of this stuff turns the application inside out. We'll still have
Mhm.
UI elements and a lot of what's on the screen today, but it might be all sort of surrounded by a much more free form interface. I think one of the really neat things about AI is that it's so flexible and it's like personalization turned up to 11, right?
Yeah.
Everybody, if you go to your, you know, your banking application today, you and me get the exact same app. That's just how it has to be. But maybe it turns out you prefer a different way of seeing your accounts and all the things you can do there than I do. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if we get to the point where the typical banking experience is one that learns from your preferences and adapts to you. But underneath it, to your point a minute ago, there's a structure and a consistency. So we're not saying different things when we talk about the meaning of a wire transfer or a
Right.
deposit into your bank account. I think we all want that stuff to be um, common, but there's so much room on top of that to adapt to customers and to what they want. And I think that's going to attract people. I think people want that kind of an experience when they're using software.
Yeah, it's just gonna like be wearing different clothes, like just to fit specifically what you were looking for. We already see some of this in applications where, sure, everyone gets the same app, but maybe when you land on the app, you get like a different set of personalized topics or features or assets, or you customize your home on the app, right? So it's like
Yeah.
there's already a world where users are invited to customize their software and kind of like collaborate with it. And now we're going to turn it up to 11, like you said. I really like that as a way of like describing it because it's like just it's going beyond even the bounds of what we thought that this stuff could do. And your prediction too, it reminds me of one from past guests. He's been on the show a few times. Rob Zubair of Circle CI. He talked
Oh,
about
sure.
how,
Yeah.
yeah, made a prediction at an event that DI Dev Interrupted hosted back in December about how maybe in the future, when you make a website request or you go and you try to query that data, instead of getting a website and then the website's data is hydrated for you on demand, the website itself could be created on the fly
Exactly.
to fit what you're
Yeah.
looking for. So do you feel the same way? Like that might be a future.
It'll be something like that. I'm sure we've got all the exact details wrong. I mean, it's telling the future is so hard, but personalization is definitely part of it. Here's another one. I think it's gonna. I think AI is probably the next big push to elevate not just the amount of API calls that you were getting at before, but just think about how important APIs become, because APIs are the capabilities of a business. Like it's the stuff that a company or a system can do.
Yeah.
And Uber, we all use the Uber app, but maybe the app gets a lot less important. And there's already hints of this, right? You can call an Uber from Apple Maps, or maybe it's Lyft, or I don't know. There's all kinds of like car
Right.
sharing and map partnerships out there, right? As an example. But the real value of Uber in a real sense is the network of drivers and all of the machinery that knows how to schedule, knows how to price. That's the actual asset, I think. It's companies that have something like that and can expose it in a agent-friendly format. That's just a fancy way of saying good APIs, I think. That might have profound impact on companies that we think of as really valuable or that have a really important experience, right? And I think there's going to be a race in a lot of different industries to go in that direction. You probably won't be able to use your user-facing application surface area as your calling card in the future.
Right. It becomes, having that killer app that has like all of the good experience in it. It's still valuable, but it's maybe not like the clincher that it would have been in the past, because now it's about the asset of, what is the service or the data that you're providing as part of your company. If you want to
Yeah.
consume with Uber, it's like you said, it's the scheduling, it's the availability of the drivers, it's the networking of all of those through their APIs. And so in a world, there's like a world where you would call your Uber from like a conversation or another app entirely. And so you get
Yeah.
almost like a commoditization of the services that people are providing. And so, if you're an engineering leader right now, like a lot of our listeners are, and maybe you already have one of these very valuable types of data sets or APIs or orchestration that you're sitting on top of, that you ship and you put out through an app or a website or a SaaS, whatever it may be. What are some steps that you think that leader should be taking today to make sure that that asset is unlocked tomorrow?
Well, I think they should go to apollo.dev and uh, I mean,
So it
well, I
all
think
starts with
I think
graph
that's
for
true,
sure.
but
Yeah.
I do think platforms are going to be really important. I think every engineering leader should have a really clear platform strategy in terms of what's my stack, what are the components of that stack, and in the areas where I'm maybe relying on bespoke software that we build ourselves, maybe look for you know, a standards-based, platform-based alternative to that. I feel pretty good about that prediction because um, we know that AI-generated software, when constrained, I mean, a good platform basically provides guardrails and rules and laws of physics, right? So when
Right.
you have that, we know that the AI can go very, very fast. My guess is that humans aren't going to be writing much of that software in just a few years, right? It'll just be the AI, and maybe there'll be another AI that does your code review and a third AI that does your, CI/CD sequencing. And I'm sure there's a human somewhere in that picture, but it's going to start to get pretty abstract. But I think there's going to be this growing need for a higher level understanding of the overall system and the architecture. And that's exciting. I mean, I think like we don't write assembly code anymore, right? Like this whole
Right.
industry is just a series of increasingly powerful abstractions. To use them well, you have to understand the layer underneath that abstraction, right? You weren't a good C programmer if you didn't understand assembly, but you didn't have to write assembly anymore.
Right.
You could say the same thing about other modern programming languages. I think the same thing's going to be true about how all this stuff gets glued together. You'll have to understand Kubernetes, but you probably won't have to write operators too much anymore. You'll have to understand how graph works. I think that will be the orchestration layer for APIs, but you probably won't be writing GraphQL schemas by hand or queries by hand. You'll have to understand how React works, but I think the days of handwriting React components are probably not much longer for us, right?
Right.
That's my guess, and I think you can work backwards from that. We find at Apollo just internally, we've really leaned into the culture around writing and documentation, because I think it's a good way to do that kind of higher level thinking and design work that you need to do. Um, I just think there's a lot of interesting implications for how you build an engineering team, what skills you emphasize, what skills are maybe a lot less critical than they were before.
So strong communication skills, strong understanding of the engineering fundamentals. Those are the things that are more important. And doing things like actually writing the code, that takes more of a backseat because of what you described, this future where LLMs are going to be doing a lot of that process.
Even thinking about it just from the point of view of how you talk to if you're using Cursor or Claude
Yeah.
or any of these things today, right? What I find is if I know what I want and I explain it clearly, I get good results.
Yeah.
So those are the two skills, right? You have to know what you want, which means you have to have a certain just higher level knowledge of the broader landscape, and you have to be able to explain it well. And it's just interesting. They're different skills than, certainly, we emphasized a generation ago, and that shouldn't be a big surprise to us, right? The technologies change, and so the skill set changes with it. But that's the kind of thing we're thinking a lot about, and um, it's exciting because I think it opens the door for a lot of really strong talent to do this kind of work that maybe didn't have some of the more domain specific knowledge of React or whatever else it may be, and didn't feel like they could build the software today.
Yeah, I really identify with that myself because I have a humanities background before I moved into DevRel, which was kind of like my bridge into tech. So I used to be a teacher. I studied like classical languages, right? And so it
Yeah.
doesn't really have anything to do with programming. But as I've gotten more, I've learned to code. I was in web dev for a while, and as I've moved more into like developer marketing, now I see this world where these communication skills that I spent so long building and using it to understand the underlying concepts of something and communicate what I want, like those are becoming even more important. And these are soft skills that engineers have, maybe in the past not prioritized as much, but now become so much more important. And it opens the door for a lot of people to then develop their own software. We've talked about this in the past about, you'll get the rise of like personalized software, disposable software that you just make once to do something or for yourself or for a project. And we're seeing this really fast right now on like the web and with web dev. We talked with Vercel, Lee Robinson over there about this because
Yeah.
nothing moves faster than the web, and so they're right now kind of seeing this where people make stuff on demand, and people from all sorts of non-technical backgrounds are able to get in there and make something. But at the end of the day, they have to know what they want to make, and so having that higher level understanding of what is my goal in going in Cursor and asking it to build something, it kind of contrasts the whole thing going on right now where everyone's talking about vibe coding and everyone has a different reaction to it. Some people have a very negative reaction to it, and some people think that it's like an accessibility thing for many people to be able to get into programming. But at the core of all of those conversations, everyone always arrives at this same point of you need to know what you want and you need to know when the LLM got it right or wrong, right? You need to have that understanding. What's your take on that right now?
Yeah, I agree. I think the other big gap, and it's just an age-old story, is there's a huge difference between prototype and production. And
Yep.
I think that was true long before vibe coding, right? Like lots of things can get built in a sprint that for real take the better part of a year. And AI is going to accelerate all of those constants, but I don't think it's going to change the fundamentals where the software we actually work with every day as people, the stuff on our phone or the stuff that we use when we log in for the morning, there's so much more to it than like what was on the screen and getting a first version of that to work.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that doesn't get the attention that the the flashy stuff gets, but it's no less critical. And I'm sure we'll see. This seems like a pretty safe prediction. I'm sure we'll see a lot of energy going into that part of the development life cycle, in terms of where AI can help and what ought to change about the stack. But I know for sure that the typical team that we talk to has a mandate to ship. They are
Yep.
being asked to prioritize AI. They've uh, they've got some instincts for what the experience ought to be, but there's a lot of open questions, not just the AI, API orchestration problem, but there's a lot of questions about what the rest of that stack's going to look like. That's, if you're into dev tools or infrastructure, it's a very exciting time because all this stuff is going to get sorted, I think, over the next year or two. And uh, the thing I hear over and over again is it's you can't just YOLO an AI experience and not worry about the part where it you know leaks sensitive information or just think of all the things that could go wrong, right? And people are well aware of that. So there's still a lot of work ahead of us, I think, for all of us to get that stuff squared away.
Yeah. We're hinting at this world where the AIs are they're writing the code, they're testing it, they're reviewing the PRs, and now they're also at the heart of accessing your data, understanding the structure of your data. What kind of prevents this from becoming the Wild West? How do we really keep a handle on it as engineers, and understand what's going on when all of these systems are interacting?
Yeah, I mean, I fall back on system design for a lot of this, right? If you think about the overall stack, the LLM is just one part of it, and if you think about the responsibility, the role of each piece of the stack, and if you think about the sort of inherent limitations or safeguards that the boundaries between those things create, that's part of the answer, right? So like I may not understand exactly what the LLM's doing, but I know that if I give it a very specific set of MCP tools and I understand what those tools do, that creates some amount of safety, right? I don't think the AI is going to reach around MCP in the near future and go get what it wants directly out of the database.
Right.
Maybe there's a dystopia that's coming for us here, but I think the data is safe for the moment. And so, it's stuff like that I think like covers the bases around a lot of this. I think analytics and measurement is another huge unanswered question, right? What's the right way to measure the quality of a agentic experience? It's going to be a lot different from how we think about CSAT and software. And um, my guess is that a lot of that will get fed back through some kind of an offline AI process. Like one of the things we're thinking about is you don't want to give AI unfettered access to all your APIs. That's just a non-starter. So the way that we approach this and what we talk about today with our MCP tooling is that you use the graph infrastructure to create a set of specific MCP tools, right? Maybe there's a tool for adding something to your shopping cart. And under the hood, that might call 5 or 10 different APIs, but the way those are combined is done on the graph layer. So the AI is not making something up here. But the question becomes, how do we know what tools to build? And how do we know that when we put a customer in front of the agent, they're getting a good experience? Because you've probably had the experience where you called a human agent for something and they were like, I can't really help you. Like, "Well, okay."
Yeah.
So I think there's going to be a whole flow around feeding the whole interaction through a different set of processes with a human in the loop. Maybe this is what a modern product management job looks like, or even a development job. It's hard to say, right? I think there's going to be some new job titles here. But there's a process where we learn from the interactions in real time, turn that right around into shipping a new capability for a customer. And it's interesting. This is what I was getting at before. Like, if I opened my app on my phone, say my app for my bank, and it was different every day, I don't think anybody really wants that.
No.
But agents can get better every day, and it's just good. It just means they're more capable. It means they make fewer mistakes. It means I have to fall back to the handwritten software, or maybe an interaction that involves a human less often, which means I get it done faster, right? Like, that's just net good. And so I think that we've removed some of the natural bottleneck on how fast this stuff can improve. And that's where I think there's going to be a really rich vein of, AI enabled products and technology that help us do that well.
I completely agree. I think there's so much opportunity that we're right on the cusp of taking advantage of. And you've kind of outlined in this conversation a lot of really great ways that teams can get started with it and some really salient predictions, I think, about where all of this is going. And for me, this has been like a really fun chat, Matt. You have such good insight on what's evolving in the industry right now. But before we start wrapping up, where can our audience go to learn more about Apollo and the work y'all are doing? You mentioned you recently dropped an MCP server.
Yeah, we're at apollo.dev, so you can read about the underlying graph infrastructure as well as what it means to use that with an agent. And the MCP stuff is cool. I got to tell you, like, if you haven't had the experience yet, one of the reasons GraphQL flourished is that it's a joy. It's really fun to write
Agree.
queries. It's The tools are solid, but there's something even deeper than that. It's just like being able to explore your APIs in this way and navigate that stuff. I think any developer that's had that experience knows what I'm talking about. There's a new one now, which is watching an LLM crawl over your graph and write a query. It's amazing. And this stuff's really easy to do. The knock on GraphQL for a long time is that it's incredibly powerful, but it's hard to get started with because you have to convert APIs into this GraphQL format before you can take advantage of all the stuff we've been talking about. That's not true anymore. You can bring any REST API to this world. You just write some configuration. So I think for any developer, just trying this stuff out on your own API is worth the half hour, and it'll give you something interesting to think about. I think that's a fair promise. And then, look, I'll just go back to what we started with. I think I've been doing this a long time. I've just never seen so much energy. I've never seen it across the developer landscape. I've never seen it across the C-suite in terms of the urgency of doing AI stuff. Like, what a time. And I don't know where this is going. I mean, I said some stuff. I think most of it's probably directionally right, but the only way to really know and to find out is to get your hands dirty and shape the world. That's why I do this stuff, and I just think it's going to be a really interesting year to come.
I couldn't agree more. The joy of experimenting right now and being in the space, it's a really unique time to be exploring what we can all build. And I know after this conversation, I'm going to go check out what y'all are doing. There's been some really interesting tidbits about how teams can take advantage of this now. And so we're going to make sure we include this stuff in our show notes so that, our listeners can go and check it out as well. And to you, our listener, if you've made it this far to the end of the conversation, then you clearly loved what we talked about today. Be sure to give it a subscribe if you haven't already on wherever you're listening to the podcast. Maybe even give us a like or a rating. But if you're not reading our Substack, which I mention every week, definitely go and check that out as well, because we're going to be dropping Matt's interview there, along with the links and some news related to this topic, because we cover things every Tuesday on our Substack. So be sure to check us out. And thanks for joining us today on today's Dev Interrupted. We'll see you next time.